Okay, guys, so today we're going to be learning about how to connect the three representations of functions that we've learned about. So, the first thing I want to talk about is how we actually write equations and how we're going to figure out how to do that. So, when you have an equation, it normally looks like this in the form y equals mx plus b. And all that means, for an example, would be something like y equals 2x plus 3. So that's kind of where we get that from. So the m here is the rate of change that you find from a table. So when you're finding the rate of change like we did last week, you would just plug that in the equation here. And the B comes from the y-intercept on a graph or in a table. When you have x is equal to 0, whatever you get as your output for that is your y-intercept, okay? So remember, you're using, when you write an equation, your coefficient or the m is going to be your rate of change or slope. Those can be used interchangeably. In your constant is going to be your y-intercept or that number that's next to 0 in a table. So we're going to do an example here. A little too far. So I have y equals x plus 1. So all that means is I'm going to take everything in my x column and add 1. And that's how I fill in the table. So here I'm going to now find my rate of change and my y-intercept. So I'm just going to look for where x is equal to 0 and highlight that, because whatever's on the y side is my y-intercept. So here I see that when x is 0, y is 1. So my y-intercept is going to be the point 0, 1. Okay? And my rate of change is just my coefficient. So right here, where I basically have 1x, okay? So remember, if you just have x, your coefficient is 1. That's my rate of change or my slope. And so that's going to be 1 in this case. Whenever you have just x like that, your rate of change is always 1. Okay? If there's not a number, your rate of change is 1. So here we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply every x by 2, and then I'm going to add 1. So negative 1 times 2 plus 1, 0 times 2 plus 1, 1 times 2 plus 1, and 2 times 2 plus 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and highlight my row where my y-intercept is going to be. So I see that I have a 0 in the x column, which means my y-intercept will be in the table. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that row so I remember that's where I'm going to find that. And now I'm going to just do the math. So negative 1 times 2 plus 1 is negative 1. 0 times 2 plus 1 is 1. 1 times 2 plus 1 is 3. And 2 times 2 plus 1 is 5. So I see that my y-intercept is 0, 1, because when x is 0, I get 1 in my y column. And my rate of change is really easy to find. It's right there, right next to my x as my coefficient. And it is my slope or my rate of change. And I can see that that is 2. So down here, we just have a table and a graph. No equation, no nothing like that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, and this is what I suggest you do every time, is pick out where you've got that x equal to 0 so you can find your y-intercept. So I see right here my y-intercept, it's 0, 0, because when x is 0, y is 0. So now I'm going to graph this. And I'm going to start with the point 1, 3. So I'm going to go on the horizontal line and find 1, because 1 is my x value. And remember, x is the horizontal line. So I'm going to find 1 on the x-axis. And then the y-axis is the vertical line. So I'm going to find 3. So I see right here, my first point, my x value is 1, and then I go up to see that my y value is 3. Same thing here. I'm going to go over to 2 on the x-axis and then go up to 6 for my y value. And then, of course, I have 0, 0 right here in the middle. And I draw my line. And guess what we're going to use? We are going to use rise over run, just like we learned last week with rate of change, to do our change in y over our change in x. So remember, we do the rise over the run, or the vertical over the horizontal change. And in this case, my triangle goes up 3 and over 1. So rise over run would be 3 divided by 1, which is 3. And since this is my slope, it is also my rate of change. So my rate of change would be 3. So down here, I'm graphing again. I'm going to do the same thing by pointing out my y-intercept right here. And you can see that that is 0, 0, because when x is 0, y is 0. And now I'm going to graph. So I'm going to go on the horizontal line and find 1. And then I'm going to go down the y-axis and find -2. And that is where that point would be. Then I'm going to go over and find 2, and then go down to -4, over to 3, and down to -6. And then I'm going to draw my line again. But this time we're going to find rate of change a little different. So we're going to use the table. So since it gives you the table, we can use that same way we learned last time, where we use the change in y over the change in x, which is the same thing, only instead of drawing the triangle, we're doing it this way. So I see with y, I'm subtracting 2 every time, and for x, I'm adding 1. So remember that triangle y, or the delta y over the delta x, change in y over the change in x. Our change in y is a decrease of 2 each time, and our change in x is an increase of 1. So I have -2 over 1. So my rate of change, or my slope, would be -2. So now on the bottom here, I have 0 plus 3. I'm just going to add 3 to all my x values. So I've added 3 to all of them. 0 plus 3 is 3. 1 plus 3 is 4. 2 plus 3 is 5. And 3 plus 3 is 6. And again, I get that from this equation right here that tells me y is going to be equal to my x value plus 3. So we're going to do the same thing for rate of change. I see x is increasing by 1 each time, and y is also increasing by 1 each time. So I'm going to do my change in y over my change in x. And I'm going to see that my rate of change, or my slope, is equal to 1 over 1, which is 1. And now we're going to graph. So I'm going to go on my x-axis and find 0, which is right in the middle. And then on y, I'm going to go up to 3. And then I'm going to go over to 1, up to 4, over to 2, up to 5, and 3 up to 6. So now I have my graph. And remember, I find where x is equal to 0, and then I'm going to see what my y value is. So here, my x value is 0, but my y is 3. So my y-intercept is going to be 0, 3. Okay, so here I'm given an equation, and I have to figure out the table and the graph, and I have to figure out the rate of change and the y-intercept. So the first thing I'm going to do is see that my equation asks me to multiply all of my x values by 3. So that's what I'm doing over here on the left side right now. So I do negative 3 times 3, negative 2 times 3, negative 1 times 3, and then 0 times 3. So here I see that y is increasing by 3 each time, while x is increasing by 1. So I take my change in y over my change in x, which is 3 over 1, and that is equal to 3. So my rate of change is going to be equal to 3. Now I'm going to graph. So I'm going to find negative 3 on the graph and go down to negative 9. Then I'm going to find negative 2. I'm going to go to the left and find negative 2 right here. And then I'm going to go down to negative 6 right here. Then I'm going to go to negative 1 right here and down to negative 3. And then right here at 0, 0. So once again, to find my y-intercept, I find where x is equal to 0, and I see what I get for y. So there, when x is 0, y is also 0. So my y-intercept is 0, 0. So now I'm given a table. This is where things get a little more challenging. So now I'm given a table and asked to find the equation from the table. So far it's been pretty easy because getting the equation from a table from a graph getting a table from an equation is not very difficult. Sometimes getting an equation from a table is a little more difficult. So we're going to go through this together. So I start with my table, and I'm going to go ahead and find my change in y. I notice that y is decreasing by 2 every time, which is represented with a negative 2 right here, while x is increasing by 1. So my change in y over my change in x is going to be a negative 2 over 1, which is equal to negative 2, and I'm going to fill that in right here. Now, I'm going to graph by going over to negative 3 and up to 6, over to negative 2 and up to 4, over to negative 1 and up to 2, and then staying right here at 0, 0. And once again, I'm just going to go ahead and draw my line. Make sure you're always putting an arrow on your line. Typically, it's on both ends, so that's my fault that I didn't include that. So here I find where x is equal to 0, and I see that y is also equal to 0. So my y-intercept is 0, 0. Now we have to write our equation. So I want to remind you guys of that mx plus b that we saw earlier, and that's where we're going to really use this. So remember, the m is equal to your slope or your rate of change. So here, my m, or my rate of change, or my slope, any of them, we've got that figured out. And remember, the b is equal to your y-intercept. So it's equal to whatever the y coordinate is of that x equals 0 point. So here my rate of change is negative 2. So I'm going to write that as negative 2x. Okay, so I'm just going to plug in negative 2 for the m. And in this case, b is equal to 0 because when x is 0, y is 0. So you can write plus 0, but that's not actually right. That's just kind of extra. So you do not need to write the plus 0. You can just leave it as negative 2x. So we're going to do the same thing again 2 more times. So here, this time I only have the graph. So I am going to pull the points out of the graph. So right here, I see that my x is equal to negative 1, and my y is at positive 1. And right here, I have 0, and 0. Over here, my horizontal is at positive 1, and vertically I'm at negative 1. So my x is 1 and my y is negative 1. And on this one right here, my x is a positive 2, but my y is a negative 2. So I'm going to have the point positive 2, comma, negative 2, because my x is positive and my y is negative. So now that I've got those points, what I'm going to do is find my change in x, and I can see that I'm increasing by 1 each time. And then I'm going to find my change in y, and I see that I'm actually decreasing by 1. So I take my change in y over my change in x, which is going to be negative 1 over 1, gives me negative 1. And then I can see right here that when x is 0, y is 0. When x is 0, y is 0. So my y-intercept is 0, comma, 0. So I can write this as negative 1x, but I want us to get in the habit of not writing that negative 1 and instead just writing negative x. Okay? And like I said, technically you have negative 1x plus 0, but the 1 and the plus 0 aren't needed. So it's just y equals negative x. Okay? And lastly, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to pull these points. So I see horizontally I'm at negative 1, but vertically I'm at negative 4. In here I'm at 0 and I'm at negative 3. Right here I'm at 1 horizontally, but vertically I'm at negative 2. In here, my x is a positive 2 and my y is a negative 1. So horizontally, I'm at positive 2. Vertically, I'm at negative 1. And now what I'm going to do is just fill in the table with those points. Okay, and now we're just going to do the same steps we did last time. I'm going to find my y-intercept. So I see that when x is 0, y is actually going to be negative 3. So my y-intercept is 0, comma, negative 3. Now to find my rate of change, I'm going to look at how x and y are changing. I see that x is increasing by 1 each time, while y is also increasing by 1. So I have the change in y over the change in x. 1 over 1 gives me 1. So my rate of change is 1. So now I'm going to write my equation. So I plug in my rate of change for m, which is 1. But remember, we don't need ones next to variables, so we're just going to leave it as x. And now I actually have a b value. So here my b value is this minus 3. So we can write that as x minus 3. If it was positive, it would have been x plus 3. But you're going to keep whatever sign is on here, okay? Do not write x plus negative 3. That will be wrong. So it either needs to be x plus 3 or x minus 3. So it's your job to pay attention to the sign down here. Okay? All right, guys, that is it for this. We're going to have the live with the examples on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on your class. But as always, reach out to me if you need help. Thanks, guys.